Consumer Council finds cancer-causing dyes in 2 school uniform samples. China and the EU leaders meet in Beijing. And a summit between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin underway in Helsinki.
Hello and a very good evening. As parents and students across town prepare for the coming school year, the city's consumer watchdog is warning of cancer-causing dyes found in some school uniforms. Winnie Wong gives us the details.
These crisp white school uniforms might look innocent enough, but according to the Consumer Council, parents need to watch out. Recently, the watchdog visited 22 of the city's uniform shops and collected 49 school uniforms. The price was anywhere between $50 to $280. They were carefully inspected in terms of quality, from endurance levels to chemical tests. For some items, the results were rather worrying. These two in particular. A harmful aromatic amine called 4-aminoazobenzene was discovered in the trimmings of these girls' tops. It contained 173 milligrams of the substance per kilo. It was bought at Shengfat School Clothier in North Point. Another was the checkered belt of this girl's dress, bought at a shop in Tin Shui Wai. It contained 41 milligrams of the aromatic amine per kilo. These numbers exceed the mainland standard of 20 milligrams per kilo. The chemical 4-aminoazobenzene is released by azo dyes through a reduction process and is considered a carcinogenic to humans and animals.
Because of the reduction process through perspiration or maybe heat, whatever, there's a possible absorption of this kind of carcinogenic substance into their body.
For some uniforms, formaldehyde and high pH values, which exceeded mainland standards, were also discovered.
When the parents and after they purchase the uniform, because this time we also found formaldehyde and also pH value is a bit high, so this is washable. These kind of chemicals are washable. So what you can do is to wash it once, then these kind of chemical levels could reduce to a more safe degree.
Some parents say they don't really have a choice, but will heed the watchdog's suggestions.
And this is the sole provider of the school uniform that we can do not many things that we can do, but basically when we get it home we will make it absolutely clean, washed, and then maybe we will have an undershirt under that, so try our best to separate from those color things.
The 2 schools which these uniforms belong to have asked students to stop wearing the items if they were bought from the problematic shops. Winnie Wong, TVB News.
The Consumer Council also found antibiotic and pesticide residue and even foreign sugars in some of the honey samples it tested. Christy Lung has more details.
Pure honey, 100% natural. So claims the packaging of these honey products. That's really true. The Consumer Council tested 45 general honey products, including 10 Manuka honey samples. Manuka honey comes from bees that pollinate the Manuka bush that grows predominantly in New Zealand and Australia. The watchdog found 2 samples contain residues of cancer-causing antibiotics, and both have been referred to the Center for Food Safety for follow-up actions. This product contains residues of an antibiotic that affects the male reproductive system. And this one, which is already taken off the shelves, contains residues of up to 8 different kinds of antibiotics. One of them proved to be carcinogenic when tested on laboratory animals.
Like the EU and America, they don't allow to have this kind of antibiotics used on animals already. And also they have a very good standard to regulate the practice of the industry. So in Hong Kong right now, we have almost 0.
The council also found 7 of the honey samples were adulterated with foreign sugars, including this one from New Zealand, which is sold at more than $1,000.
Some of the very expensive honey, their ranking is only about 2. So we just want to say that there is not necessarily a correlation between the price of the honey towards the overall quality.
Although Manuka honey is often touted as a superfood, it's worth noting that there is limited research on the benefits of consuming it. Working together with the International Consumer Research and Testing, the watchdog also tested 14 anti-cellulite creams. It was found that none of them was able to eliminate the cellulite, though some could reduce the thigh circumference, but the effect was only temporary. Christy Lung, TVB News.
In other local news, the observatory may issue the standby signal number 1 tonight or tomorrow morning. An area of low pressure near Luzon has intensified into a tropical depression. It's expected to move across the Luzon Strait and traverse the northern part of the South China Sea in the general direction of western Guangdong and Hainan Island. Members of the public are advised to remain vigilant against swells and stronger winds in the following few days ahead. European Union leaders have urged their counterparts from China, Russia and the United States to work with Europe to avoid trade wars and prevent chaos. The comments by European Council President Donald Tusk came on the sidelines of a summit with Premier Li Keqiang in Beijing. Jeff Tang reports.
The summit between China and the European Union opened in Beijing this morning. It came just hours ahead of a separate summit between US President Donald Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin in the Finnish capital of Helsinki. Besides Premier Li Keqiang and European Council President Donald Tusk, the 20th annual EU-China Economic Summit was also attended by European Commission President Jean-Claude Juncker. Speaking after the opening meeting, the Premier said both sides agreed to take steps to safeguard free trade and the global multilateral regulatory system. This comes as Beijing and Washington are engaged in a tit-for-tat tariff war that could soon affect hundreds of billions of US dollars worth of each other's products. The China-US trade friction is the problem between us, Li said. China doesn't want a trade war with the US. We think there is no winner from a trade war. Any actions that violate the World Trade Organization rules serve the interests of no one. Li also endorsed efforts to update World Trade Organization rules that Washington complains are outdated and cumbersome. Tusk, meanwhile, called on the leaders of China, Russia and the US to work with Europe to reform WTO rules.
It is a common duty of Europe and China, America and Russia, not to destroy this order, but to improve it. Not to start trade wars, which turned into hot conflict so often in our history, but to bravely and responsibly reform the rules-based international order. This is why I am calling on our Chinese hosts, but also on President Trump and Putin, to jointly start this process from a reform of the WTO. There is still time to prevent conflict and chaos.
One of the key agendas for this year's China-EU summit is for the two sides to show their joint support for the WTO as the center of the multilateral trading system. Meanwhile, the EU is also seeking to finalize a deal to allow better protection of well-known European food brands in China. If both sides come to an agreement, it will be their first international trade treaty and send a strong signal for future cooperation in trade and investment. But while European leaders have criticized Trump's trade tactics, they also share US complaints about Chinese industrial policies and trade barriers. That's why Beijing has so far failed to recruit Germany, France and other EU countries as allies against Washington. Jeff Tang, TVB News.
A summit meeting between US President Donald Trump and his Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin is now underway in Helsinki. Both leaders hope the talks will reset frosty relations between the two countries. But critics of Trump think the meeting comes at the wrong time, given the recent indictment of 12 Russians over allegations of meddling in the 2016 US presidential election. It was all smiles and waves as US President Donald Trump arrived in Helsinki ahead of his meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin. Before his meeting with Putin, Trump sat down this morning with the President of Finland, which is hosting the summit. This comes as questions swirl about whether Trump will sharply and publicly rebuke Putin over allegations of Russian meddling in the US election process that has prompted a special counsel probe.
With so many suspicions flying around that there is collusion or cooperation between the US and Russia, or that Trump has a long-standing arrangement with the Russian government, however unfounded and without evidence they may be, the optics of going into a room alone without your handlers, without your advisors, are simply alarming and unexplainable.
Trump continued to undermine the investigation in a series of tweets, blaming it for the ongoing tensions in US-Russian relations. He also continued to blame his predecessor Barack Obama for failing to stop Russia's efforts to sway the 2016 election, claiming Obama knew about the problem but did nothing to stop it. The meeting also comes as Trump lays waste to old American alliances. Within a week, he attacked NATO members for not spending enough, chided Germany for its dependence on Russian energy, undermined British Prime Minister Theresa May on Brexit, and called the European Union a foe on trade. While Trump is eager for a TV spectacle that will dominate the headlines like his sit-down with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un last month, the Kremlin's goal has been simply to have the summit happen. Putin hopes the meeting, hours after he presided over the World Cup final, will help him forge good personal ties with Trump and focus on areas where Moscow and Washington may be able to find common ground. At least 48 people in Iraq were wounded as protests in the southern part of the country entered into a seventh day. Scores climbed the perimeter fence of a government building but quickly dispersed after tear gas canisters were fired. Water cannons were also used against the protesters. Others lit fires to show their anger. Iraqis protested over a lack of jobs and basic services in the oil-rich area of Basra, which has 70% of the country's oil reserves. Government officials held an urgent meeting promising work for locals near the oil fields in an attempt to quell the violence. Authorities also tried to cut the internet to stop the spread of the demonstrations.
Welcome back. Protesters filled the streets of Chicago for a second straight night after a black barber was shot and killed by police. As Peter Coveos tells us, the incident is stoking tensions in the city.
Police hastened the release of the video. The footage from Saturday has no audio, but it shows officers on foot patrol approach the 37-year-old Harith Augustus, suspecting he was armed. Augustus has a holstered gun, and it looks like he reaches for it as he tries to get away. All this before he was shot and killed.
We're not trying to hide anything. We're not trying to fluff anything. The video speaks for itself. I don't need to narrate that video for you. When you see it, you come to your own conclusions about what happened.
Demonstrators say this is an all too common occurrence and throw objects at the police during another day of protests. This is the third police shooting in Chicago in the last 2 weeks. One activist claimed the actions of the officers were unnecessary, as Augustus was on his way to a bachelor party.
He was leaving the barbershop, he was walking past. The police, Augustus saw his holster, told him to come here. They disarmed him. He told them he was concealing carry. They told him to reach for him. When he reached for it, that's when they shot him.
Police called for caution during instances like this in the future.
So I just urge people, when these types of things happen, put the gun down. Put the gun down. We can always go through court and straighten it out then.
The officer who opened fire has been reassigned to desk duty for the next 30 days, while the incident is being investigated. Peter Coveos, TVB News.
Back locally, a Canadian teacher appeared in court today to face charges of indecently assaulting 2 children at a Cheung Sha Wan kindergarten. The 56-year-old man was taken to Kowloon City Magistracy this morning in a police van. He was arrested last Friday after being accused of indecently assaulting 2 girls in a classroom. The magistrate adjourned the case until August the 27th, pending further police investigations. The defendant was granted $5,000 bail, but has to surrender his travel documents. The Legislative Council's Finance Committee today approved funding for civil service pay adjustments. With the approval of the funding request, civil servants in the lower and middle salary bands will see a pay rise of 4.51%. As for the most senior government staff, it's a 4.06% increase. The salary hike will be retroactive to April 1st this year.
The West Kowloon Cultural District Authority today admitted to paying subcontractors directly, circumventing the financially troubled main contractor. Sharon Tang has more.
Introducing the M+ Museum. The West Kowloon Cultural District Authority, or WKCDA, hopes the $5 billion project can be completed by next year. Today, the WKCDA stressed that the performance of all contractors are closely monitored, including Sin Chung Construction, the main contractor. However, it's been aware of Sin Chung's financial uncertainty since 2016. So the WKCDA decided to pay subcontractors directly, with the sum deducted from Sin Chung's contract. Stressing that such arrangements are unusual but not exceptional, it says the move is to ensure construction works will continue. The authority added that it did explain the payments to the legislature back in January.
Our responsibility is to ensure that they pay the wages. We don't have a direct relationship with those workers. Our relationship is with the contractor, and through the contractor, the subcontractor, and we work through that relationship.
Still, lawmakers are upset by the way the WKCDA handled things. Edward Lau, chairman of the subcommittee that monitors the Cultural District project, worries the government will have to pick up the mess if subcontractors can't finish the project. Its deputy chairperson added that the WKCDA has set a bad precedent without getting LegCo's approval to pay subcontractors directly.
We urge them to submit to us the relevant contract between the WKCDA as well as Sin Chung in order to let us know the details of this contract.
She noted that the government should scrutinize any ongoing projects that are under the control of Sin Chung. Sharon Tang, TVB News.
And from all of us, thanks for joining us.
A very good night. Bye-bye.